I'm really excited to be able to talk about this book, Thomas Blomberg's Blomberg Laboratories, because it's been a few years since I have talked about it and discussed it with magicians. So I figured it would be a useful format for the book club and for this video to first of all talk about how I met Thomas and why I was drawn to his work, then a little bit about the process of writing this book, and then maybe I'll share my top, 5 or so tricks from the book, although I could probably list way more than that. So Thomas Blomberg is somebody I got to know pretty much through Jack Parker. The TSD website was in full force back then. This was maybe 2001, 2002, and Thomas was very prominent on that website. It was a forum for, I guess you could call it, really serious card magic enthusiasts, and it was a who's who of every card magician you could think of who was considered an expert was on this forum and actively participating. And Thomas was one of those people, and he was sharing magic at an absolute great pace. And he and Jack Parker became great friends, and through my friendship with Jack, I then became good friends with Thomas. We used to have our own little kind of separate study group. Me, Thomas, Jack, Jamie Badman, Tyler Wilson, a few other people. Luke Dancy was one. And that's where I really got to know Thomas. And his magic is fantastic. And talking of Jack's work, 52 Memories, and my latest book, 52 Explorations, I quoted Jim Steinmeier in my introduction to this book. And that quote, while it completely applies to Jack Parker, it also applies to Thomas Blomberg. Check this out, it's such a great quote. Magic is sometimes kept afloat by its amateurs. The ancient and occasionally anachronistic performance art may be abused and mistreated by its professionals, but has always been loved and nurtured by its devoted hobbyists. And that really sums up Thomas, because Thomas isn't a professional performer. I'm not even sure that Thomas has ever performed a professional magic show, in fact. But his magic has certainly moved magic forward. And like Jim said in that quote, magic is often outdated and perhaps held back by its professionals. And we really need people like Thomas and Jack, and also Scott Robinson. There are 4 books in this series. This is my Square Book series, and they're all by amateur magicians, or all about amateur magicians, I should say, who have moved magic forward. There's 2 books by Jack. There's one of Thomas's magic and one of Scott Robinson's magic. And I really admire that about Thomas. And I think when you have the freedom of not having to create magic for a particular show, a particular reason, you really get to think completely wide open. You don't get dragged down by practicalities, by reset, by can I carry this prop around with me for every show I do. And we see that a lot in Thomas's work. For example, I'm sure shortly we'll talk about the Konami code. That's a trick where you have to go around taking photos of people to be able to perform this trick. And I don't think professionals would go to that effort, but Thomas certainly would. But we'll talk about the material in a second. So if you don't know much about Thomas, he's from Sweden. He is in many ways kind of a self-imposed reclusive magician, I think. He doesn't appear at magic conventions. He doesn't even hang out that much at magic conventions, at least that I'm aware of. Even the conventions I've worked at in Sweden, I have not met or hung out with him. I have spent time with him at other places, though, including Jack's Soiree, which I'm sure we'll also talk about later in this video when we talk about some of the material. But the fact that Thomas doesn't have a large profile, at least as a performer, really should not detract anything away from the study that you do of this book. One of the things I wanted to mention of working on this book with Thomas was the photographs. Because we went through a period a few years ago where we were really losing magic's great illustrators. Earl Oakes had passed away, and Tony Dunn is still working, but Tony Dunn is an extremely busy magic illustrator and often hard to convince to work on projects. And there really weren't that many other illustrators out there. Richard Kaufman was busy, but he's illustrating his own books and not really an illustrator for hire. Now, luckily, over the last couple of years, I think thanks to Tom Stone's method, there have been more illustrators in magic popping up. But it was a challenge to work out what we were going to do for the illustrations for this book, because I wanted there to be a lot of illustrations to kind of match 52 Memories, which it was full of illustrations done by the wonderful Tony Dunn. So Thomas had an idea that he could write a computer program to illustrate the book. And my background is in computer programming, not particularly in image programming like Thomas's background, but I was blown away by the idea that somebody could actually write a program to illustrate a magic book. And that's exactly what he did. And you may have heard me quote quite often, especially if you work for Vanishing Inc., the phrase garbage in, garbage out, which is a programming term, which basically means if you put terrible things into a system, you expect terrible things out of a system. And I've tried to use Thomas's incredible software for my own projects, and it just seems that I'm putting garbage in because I'm getting garbage out. But what's incredible is that Thomas is not. Thomas could take a photograph and then immediately upload it to this software, and you would then get straight away this quality of magic illustration. It blows me away. It takes about 5 seconds for the software to run, and you can watch it as it's processing these images. It's absolutely fascinating and truly incredible. Thomas, in his day job, he works in image processing for a wood company, and from my understanding, he's pretty much revolutionized that industry for his work there. So working on the book with Thomas was fascinating because something that I found happens with magicians who are very prolific, Thomas is one of them, is they often aren't willing to judge their own material or help select their material. Jay Sankey was exactly the same. When Josh and I was writing that project, we had 1,500 tricks to choose from. And when we asked Jay which tricks he'd like to choose, he basically refused to participate because he said, how can I judge my babies? You guys have to do that from an external viewpoint. And Thomas had the same kind of approach. So Thomas uploaded a whole folder of tricks for me. Each trick had a text file with a description and often a video as well. So I got to go through hundreds and hundreds of tricks and moves and ideas in order to pick my favorite. So really, this book is not a full look at Thomas's work. It's just a full look of the tricks that I enjoyed working on at the time that I was working on this book. And it was a book that was difficult to write because Thomas is a very, very smart guy, and some of these tricks, honestly, the methods went completely over my head, and it's important to me that I understand every method and get to perform as many of the tricks as possible when I'm working on a book. But that was pretty difficult to do when I couldn't understand some of these things. There was a memorized deck idea, or at least a stacked deck idea that I couldn't understand. I couldn't get my head around why it worked, and even though Thomas tried to explain it to me, it was too smart to put in the book because I couldn't quite understand it. But pretty much everything else that was a highlight for me has now appeared in this book. Although I also wrote a Genie issue about Thomas, and in that issue there is a haunted deck routine that is one of the smartest haunted decks there is. It uses a loop, but after the card has been selected, the loop is attached to the deck. You then return the card with the loop around the deck, and then riffle shuffle the deck with the loop and the card engaged. It's so smart and well worth digging out because it doesn't appear in this book. So we are now, I think, pretty much at the time to talk about the tricks in the book. Although before we do, I want to show you this is a pretty unique edition of Blomberg Laboratories because it was given to me by my friend Don Bursell from Don's Magic Books. And look how strange this is. Somebody out there, I don't know who, owned this book. And whenever he saw that I mentioned a magician, he would find a photograph of them, cut it out and paste it in the front, or in some cases in the middle of the book. So we have Edward G. Brown there, Baltzar Fuentes, there's, who else? There's Al Goshman, there's Darwin Ortiz, Anneman, Paul Cummins, so many magicians. It's a little bizarre, almost a little haunting, especially when you open up this page. You see some photos here of, for some reason Josh has signed the book. I don't know why Josh has signed the book, but he has. There's a big picture of Josh there. I've signed the book, but also a tiny little photo of me in a black and white one, and randomly a photo of Dennis Blair. So a very strange edition, and I am glad to own it for two reasons. One, because it's weirdly cool, but two, managed to get that one out of circulation so that other people can't be haunted by it. So anyway, let's talk about the tricks. I'll try and pick out, let's say, 5 of my favorite tricks, and in all honesty, I haven't arranged this in advance. I don't know what tricks will jump out at me as I'm looking at the contents, but The first one, of course, is the Konami code. The Konami code is probably one that, if you're studying this book, you've already spent a great time working on and playing with. But if you haven't yet, it's well worth the effort. And you don't have to go to the photographs and do the photographs. You can also just do arrows on the cards just as a test to understand how it works. But please check out the Jerks' work on this trick, because he really moved the trick forward and added to the popularity of that trick. Magic Lesson is another one. Magic Lesson is a ring on rubber band routine, and perhaps it was the hardest one for me to describe in the book, just because it's quite a fiddly routine. But if you put the effort in, there's some incredibly smart and visual ring on rubber band moments there. I think Thomas was inspired by Simon Aronson's handling, and it's definitely worth checking out. The TB spread double is probably, of all the things in this book, I use the most. It's a double lift. I actually do it from the bottom of the deck. I think Thomas does it from maybe fifth from the top of the deck. But somebody would touch a card, and then as you square up, you've actually taken a double. So right there, the Eight of Diamonds is a double card, like this. So the Eight of Diamonds was loaded from the bottom of the deck. If I do it like this here. So as I'm spreading, I'm culling it, and now I get to load it directly below the selected card. So this is now a double. I use that a lot, and it's a very practical technique inspired by the Mike Close double lift, hence the name. So that's number 3. Let's see. Lucky 14 is a really interesting trick because I hope this person doesn't mind me talking about this, but somebody told me that they suffered from OCD around the number 14, and this is a whole trick based on the number 14, and this trick in some way helped them talk about that OCD, and they were able to perform this trick for people inspired by Thomas's trick, which is kind of really cool and just the kind of thing you never expect when you are writing a book about somebody's magic, to actually be able to help somebody in that way. Jack's trick is another really great trick, and this one has great memories for me because Jack's trick is something that Thomas was working on at breakfast at Jack's soiree. And for those who don't know, our mutual friend Jack Parker was diagnosed with cancer and told he only had a couple of months to live. And Jack's wish was to collect all of his friends together, or for all of his friends to collect together, I guess, and do one big send-off. So this was a party that we had for Jack in Portsmouth in the UK. Thomas came, and Jamie came, and Gordon Bruce came down. People flew in from America. It was a really nice small group, I think maybe 20 people, and we performed Jack's magic, and we just had fun and celebrated with Jack for the last time. And Jack's trick was something Thomas was working on at breakfast, and he performed it for Jack. It was inspired by one of Jack's other tricks, so it's definitely worth checking out. There is an update of that trick in 52 Explorations, in fact. I think I've already gone over my 5 tricks, but Tabled Oil and Water is probably the trick I perform the most from this book. It's when you work through it, it's surprisingly deceptive. It's an oil and water routine where the cards don't really leave the table, and if you perform that for other magicians, they will have no idea what you are doing. And yeah, I could just go on and on. Swedish Parody Poker is one I particularly enjoyed. Sphinx Voodoo. Tsar, T-S-A-R, is the first trick I ever saw Thomas perform. This is a technicolored successive 8 assembly with a reverse, and I challenged Thomas to perform this the first time we met because I'd read it and I couldn't imagine that anybody could actually remember the sequence of moves, and Thomas did it perfectly. Even though he said he hadn't performed it for a while, he was able to perfectly perform it. And look, there are so many more tricks we could talk about. The Packet Morpher sequence is really interesting. Liar is a fantastic lie detector trick, and you will be so busy if you play around with this material, because I think a book like this is not a book that you can just read. It's a book that you have to bury yourself in and try out the tricks, because the methods are almost always smarter than the effects read, which is a strange thing to say, I guess, but the effects in the description, they read good, they read like they're good tricks, but once you actually try them out and see the tricks unfold, I think you really get a new appreciation for how a magician like Thomas can just weave interesting, sometimes mathematical, sometimes intricate methods into a trick, and how he's able to view them, those methods from a different viewpoint, a different perspective. And I'm not sure that a professional, regularly performing magician could create some of these methods. I think, just like Jim Steinmeier says, sometimes we need the amateur magicians who have one foot in magic, one foot in something else to show us exactly how it's done and how to construct the tricks. So I hope that was of use. I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks so much for studying Jack's book. This is an amazing book club that you all have going on. And I'm so happy that I can be a part of it in this small way. So enjoy Blomberg's Laboratories.